An amazing treasure went missing during the Civil War, and if you live near the border of Georgia and North Carolina, then it may be time to dust off that metal detector and go hunting for some lost Confederate gold. However, the most invaluable tool for any treasure hunter isn't a whip or a bag or an incredible dad bod like mine, but it's knowledge itself. So why is there hundreds of thousands worth of Confederate gold on this border? Why hasn't anyone found the lost treasure? And most importantly, how can we narrow down the search from the 78 miles worth of search area for those of you looking to go out and claim this lost Confederate gold for yourself? And is it even at the border at all? Hold on, cowboy, let's just slow down. As my disclaimer in all of my treasure videos, do not do anything that will put your life in danger or do anything that is against the law. Honestly, just act right. With that out of the way, let's look into why this treasure was lost in the first place. On April the 2nd, 1865, the defensive line at Petersburg, Virginia had been broke, and the fall of the Confederate capital was all but guaranteed. The Confederate president at this time was Jefferson Davis, and since it was Sunday, he was attending church. The news was quickly brought to him, and he told his cabinet that Richmond had to be evacuated. So the men in the treasury were scheduled to leave on the only open line between Richmond and Danville, Virginia. That evening, the cabinet members left Richmond, but it wasn't until just after midnight that the second train with the treasure would also leave. Confederate President Davis would accompany the treasure on this second train, but everything was under the command of William H. Parker. He was a Navy captain and a fairly competent individual. He gathered as many other available personnel to accompany him and guard the treasure. It's a bug in my coffee. Oh, what was that? What was in this treasure? According to official records that came from the Confederacy itself, there were crates and barrels of gold, silver, coins, bullion, silver bricks, and all sorts of jewelry that were donated by the women of the South, all in the hopes of funding the war. But that's only part of the treasure. Including the gold from Richmond, there was over $450,000 alongside it. So on top of the $450,000 reserves, there were still barrels and crates of gold and silver. So the total amount they were hauling most likely exceeded $1 million, or probably even more. As this train came to the end of the line in Danville, Confederate President Davis and his staff would begin a journey south on horseback, where he would later meet up with a man in charge of transporting the treasure. Captain Parker had the treasure loaded on wagons and would be transported to the old U.S. Mint at Charlotte, North Carolina. But this journey wasn't going to be easy. He had gotten word that the U.S. cavalry was already in this area, so in an attempt to evade capture and seizing of the treasure, he ordered his company to move in a zigzag type pattern. By this time, they were at the South Carolina-Georgia state line and were moving east. Captain Parker was going to have his company camp outside of Washington, Georgia, which is where they'd end up meeting back up with Confederate President Davis. Once they did, the reserves were placed in a bank vault within Washington, Georgia, and this is where the trail gets a little fuzzy. The barrels and crates of treasure were not put into this vault, and I'll explain what I think that means in a minute. It has to do with eggs. Just days after they had made their safe arrival and stored their reserves, the $450,000 were now in the hands of Northern troops, and these troops were going to take this loot and bring it to a railhead in South Carolina. But they too were being targeted. On their way to the railhead, they were ambushed by a group of stragglers that were part of the Federal and Confederate armies. They heard about the huge fortune being transported and just couldn't resist. They set up a trap near Chenault Crossroads and managed to take an estimated $250,000 from the $450,000 they were transporting. However, remember that the barrels and crates are still unaccounted for. Out of this $250,000 they took, $111,000 was later recovered, which leaves $139,000 lost or just stolen. When Confederate President Jefferson Davis was inevitably captured, he only had a couple bucks, and the legend of his lost Confederate gold would last all the way into modern times. And now that we know why it was lost and what was happening surrounding this treasure, we can better speculate on where it might be hidden. So if those barrels and crates truly were real and full of coins and bullion and bars, where would they be? Well, like I said, it has to do with eggs. You ever hear the saying, don't ever keep all your eggs in the same basket? This means that if you have everything in one place, then it's much easier to lose it all. If they had the reserves in a bank, but actual gold and silver elsewhere, then it would be protected from potential raids, which is pretty much why they lost the $450,000. So if they knew that the cavalry was in the area and they were already on the run, what would they have done? The age-old stereotypical thing you do with treasure. They probably buried it out in the wilderness near Washington, Georgia, or perhaps the zigzag pattern that Captain Parker was making was him methodically hiding the gold coins, bullion, and bars and all across the state line. You'd think that if you were running from men on horses, that zigzagging would just allow them to catch up to you sooner. So it doesn't make much sense that he would do this. They had to have a reason of why they did it. And there's also the $139,000 that was unaccounted for when the Union troops were ambushed by the stragglers. If I had to put my money on where this treasure could be hidden, I'd say 2 specific locations. The woods surrounding Washington, Georgia, within a 10 to 20 mile radius. Just because if they brought their treasure with them, they wouldn't want it so far out that they couldn't go and check on it. They'd probably want to be able to access it once things cooled down. But honestly, my money is on the northernmost tip of Georgia going west along the border of North Carolina. This zigzag pattern he made just seems to be a little suspicious. It's just going to cause them to catch up to you much sooner than they already would have. This really makes me believe that it's still up there in the wilderness, just waiting for someone to go out and take that lost treasure for themselves. If nothing ever shows up, at least we can always daydream about this incredible mystery. And where mystery lies, adventure awaits. If you like what I do and want to help support me, then the best way to do that is by joining the community on Patreon. I post when I can, and it goes a long way in supporting the channel. But if you're not into that, then just check out this video YouTube seems to think you'll love, and I'll see you there.